Here's the solution for day 2, problem 1. Find the domain and the range of this function. F of x is equal to 1 divided by x plus 5. First thing we're asked for is what is the domain of this function? What domain refers to is what are the x values that could be inputted into this function. The domain are the allowed x values. Often, it's okay to input any real number for x, and then when working out the function rule, you get some sort of real number answer for f. But sometimes there are restrictions on x, numbers that you're not allowed to put in because that would violate rules of math. In this case here, where the variable x is in the denominator of a fraction, the math rule that we have to concern ourselves with is that the denominator of a fraction cannot be 0. So we have to make sure that when numbers are used for x, that we don't use a number that would make that denominator be 0. Well, are there any numbers for x that would make the denominator be 0? X plus 5 is the denominator. We don't want it to equal 0. X plus 5 cannot equal 0. If you subtract 5 from both sides, we find that x cannot equal negative 5. X can equal any other number. So for our domain, x is any real number except negative 5. There's the domain. Now the range. What the word range refers to for functions is what are the y values, or in this case f values, that would be created by inputting all allowed values for x. What kind of answers can this function rule generate? So it's the y values, or the function values, or in this case, the f of x values. So to find what kind of values that this function can generate, let's, in our heads, think about what would happen as we use different choices for x. Let's try some positive numbers for x. If we put in 1, we would get the answer 1/6. If we put in 2, we would get 1/7. If we put in 3, we would get 1/8. We can't use negative 5, remember, but we can use other negative numbers. So as you put in other negative numbers in here, you are going to get some more fractions as a result. If you put in a number that's very close to negative 5, like negative 5.1, think about what would happen then. Negative 5.1 plus 5 is negative 0.1, or negative 1/10. And then when you do the reciprocal of that, now you have negative 10. So we're starting to even get larger numbers for y when we put in certain things for x. Are there any numbers that this can't output? And there is. There's one number that this will never equal regardless of what you try to put in for x. There's no way that this can turn out to be 0. Because if you start with 1 and you divide it by any real number you can think of, you will never get 0 as the answer. So for our range, y is any real number except 0. Day 2, problem 2. Solve the quadratic equation by factoring. So we want to solve this equation for x. It is quadratic, so we expect to get 2 answers for x. And we're told to use factoring as our method. So we want to look at this trinomial and figure out how to factor it. Trinomials factor into a binomial times a binomial pattern. On the right side, they'll still be the equal 0. Let's figure out this number and this number by looking here. What times what makes x squared? That would have to be x times x. This is the letter F when you work out FOIL. Now let's get this number here and this number here figured out. We look here. What two numbers multiply together to make positive 5? Well, there are two possibilities. It could be 1 times 5, or it could be -1 times -5. Both of these possibilities multiply together to create positive 5. To know which pair of numbers is correct, we look in the middle term, which is -6x. Which of these numbers combine together to make -6? And that's this second pair of numbers. So what we want to put in here is a -1 times a -5. If you like, you can put the -5 here and the -1 here. So here is the factored form of that trinomial. Now we want to solve the equation from this, so we have more work to do. If we have two things that multiply together and the answer is 0, then one of the factors must be 0. That's how you get an answer of 0. So the first factor, the x minus 1, might be the one that equals 0, or the other factor, the x minus 5, that might be the one that equals 0. If either one of these factors is equal to a 0, when you do this multiplication, you would get 0. Let's solve each of these linear equations. Add 1 to both sides, we get x equals 1. Or add 5 to both sides, we get x equals 5. Here are our two solutions for x to that original quadratic equation. If we put a 1 in here and work that out, it would equal 0. Or if we put a 5 here and worked that out, we would also get 0.